If you gave me $1 billion, I'd rebrand your house again.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we are going to explore the story of Ed and Lorraine Warren, the most famous paranormal investigators in the world. We will learn who they were, how they became so famous, and we will also take a deep look at their most well-known investigation, the Amityville case. If you enjoy horror stories, paranormal mysteries, and true crime, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next investigation. Now let's begin. The Warren family, who were they? Have you ever heard the names Ed and Lorraine Warren? If you're interested in ghost stories, haunted houses, or strange mysteries, there's a good chance you've heard about them before. Some people believe they were real paranormal investigators who helped families in terrible situations. Others think they were just great storytellers. No matter what you believe, one thing is impossible to ignore. Their names became famous all over the world. So who were they? Why are people still talking about them decades later? And what made them so different from everyone else? Before we dive into their most famous investigations, let's first get to know the two people behind all these incredible stories. Ed Warren was born in 1926 in Connecticut, in the United States. According to Ed, his interest in the paranormal started when he was just a kid. He often said strange things happened inside his childhood home. He claimed he heard footsteps when nobody was there, saw dark shadows moving through rooms, and sometimes felt like an invisible presence was watching him. Most children would probably be terrified by experiences like these. But Ed was different. Instead of running away from the unknown, he became curious. He wanted to understand what was happening and why people reported similar experiences in different places. A few years later, Lorraine Warren entered his life. Lorraine was born in 1927, and she believed she had special abilities from a very young age. She said she could sometimes see or feel things that other people couldn't. She described herself as a clairvoyant and a medium. In simple words, she believed she could sense spiritual activity and communicate with spirits. Of course, not everyone believed her. Some people trusted her completely, while others wanted scientific proof before accepting her claims. That debate continues even today. When Ed and Lorraine met, they quickly realized they shared the same interest. After getting married, they decided to work together. Instead of living an ordinary life, they chose a very unusual path. They traveled across the United States, visiting families who believed they were experiencing something they couldn't explain. Some people reported hearing strange voices in the middle of the night. Others claimed doors opened by themselves, objects moved without anyone touching them, or dark figures appeared inside their homes. Whenever someone asked for help, Ed and Lorraine would often pack their bags and go investigate. Ed focused on researching the history of each place. He talked to witnesses, searched for old records, and tried to understand what might have happened in the past. Lorraine, on the other hand, relied on what she believed were her psychic abilities to sense whether something supernatural was present. Together, they became one of the most famous paranormal investigation teams in America. Over the years, the Warrens said they investigated thousands of paranormal cases. Every investigation was different. Some involved haunted houses. Others focused on strange objects, mysterious sounds, ghost sightings, or people who believed they were being haunted by evil spirits. But fame also brought criticism. Many skeptics argued that there wasn't enough evidence to support the Warrens' claims. They believed many of the stories had natural explanations, while others suggested that some events became more dramatic each time they were retold. On the other hand, supporters believed Ed and Lorraine were honest people who truly wanted to help frightened families. They believed the Warrens faced dangerous situations because they cared about others. This disagreement between believers and skeptics is one of the reasons why the Warrens remain such fascinating figures today. Even after so many years, people still debate whether their investigations revealed something truly supernatural, or whether there were more ordinary explanations behind the stories. Whatever the truth may be, one fact cannot be denied. Ed and Lorraine Warren had a huge impact on the world of paranormal investigation. Their names became connected with some of the most famous and mysterious cases ever reported. And that's exactly what we're going to explore next. In the next part of this video, we'll take a look at several of their most famous investigations before we finally arrive at the case that many people still call their greatest mystery, the Amityville case. The Amityville Horror. You know what's really creepy? It's not just ghosts. It's not demons. It's not haunted houses. It's when a story becomes so famous that 50 years later, people are still arguing about whether it actually happened. Neither side has managed to prove the other wrong. Today we're going back to the beginning. Long before Hollywood, long before the books, long before Ed and Lorraine Warren ever stepped inside that house. Because before Amityville became the world's most famous haunted house, it became the scene of one of the most shocking family murders America had ever seen. So, turn the lights down, get comfortable, and let's go back to Long Island, New York, to a quiet neighborhood where nobody expected history to be made. The house stood at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. If you've ever seen a picture of it, you probably remember those famous quarter-circle windows on the top floor. At first glance, it didn't look scary. Actually, it looked kind of beautiful. A large Dutch colonial home sitting beside a peaceful canal. A private boathouse, a nice backyard, trees everywhere. The kind of place where you'd expect family barbecues, kids riding bicycles, neighbors waving hello every morning. Nothing about it looked dangerous. Nothing looked haunted. If someone showed you a picture without telling you the story, you'd probably say, wow, that's a nice house. But sometimes, the most terrifying places don't warn you. Sometimes, they smile first. Back in 1974, the house belonged to the DeFeo family. Living there were Ronald DeFeo Sr. and his wife Louise, along with their 5 children. To everyone outside, they looked like a normal American family, but behind closed doors, things weren't nearly as perfect as they seemed. Their oldest son, Ronald DeFeo Jr., nicknamed Butch, had a history of violence. He argued constantly with his parents. He struggled with drug use. He had a bad temper. Friends later described him as unpredictable. Some days he seemed completely normal. Other days, he scared people. Still, nobody imagined what was about to happen. Then came the night that changed everything. November 13th, 1974. It was just after 3 o'clock in the morning. While the neighborhood slept peacefully, something horrifying was happening inside that beautiful house. One by one, members of the DeFeo family were shot while lying in their beds. Ronald DeFeo Sr., Louise DeFeo, and all 4 of Ronald Jr.'s younger siblings. 6 people, gone, in a single night. What's even stranger, neighbors later said they didn't remember hearing multiple gunshots. No screams, no panic, no one running outside, nothing. It was as if the entire neighborhood somehow slept through one of the worst family murders in American history. That mystery alone has fueled countless theories for decades. Later that day, Ronald DeFeo Jr. ran into a local bar, clearly panicking. According to witnesses, he shouted something like, "You've got to help me. I think my mother and father have been shot." Several people rushed back to the house with him. What they found was beyond horrifying. The entire family was dead. Police arrived within minutes. At first, Ronald acted like he had no idea what had happened. He even blamed the murders on a supposed mob hitman. But investigators quickly noticed something wasn't adding up. His story kept changing. Again and again. Eventually, after hours of questioning, he confessed. He admitted that he had killed every member of his family. Naturally, everyone wanted to know the same thing. Why? Why would someone murder his own parents, his brothers, his sisters, people he had lived with his entire life? His answer only made the story stranger. According to Ronald, he didn't do it because he wanted to. He claimed he heard voices inside the house, voices that ordered him to kill. He later described feeling as if something was controlling him, pushing him, almost taking over his mind. Whether that was true, a lie, or simply an attempt to avoid responsibility, nobody knows for sure. Psychologists pointed to drug use. Investigators pointed to family conflict and financial motives. Others believed he simply invented the story. But for paranormal believers, This was the moment the legend truly began, because if the house really was influencing people, then maybe the nightmare wasn't over. Maybe it was only beginning. Ronald DeFeo Jr. was eventually arrested, put on trial, found guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder, and sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences in prison. As for the house, it became infamous almost overnight. Newspapers across America covered the murders. Television stations reported on the case. Everyone knew the address, 112 Ocean Avenue. Nobody wanted to buy it. Who would want to live in a place where 6 people had been murdered for over a year? The house sat there, quiet, empty, waiting. But then, in late 1975, a new family arrived. They knew exactly what had happened there. They knew about every murder, every headline, every rumor, and yet, they still signed the papers. They still carried their furniture inside. They still believed they could start a new life there. Their names were George and Kathy Lutz, and they had absolutely no idea that the next 28 days would turn them into one of the most famous families in paranormal history. So, it's December 18th, 1975, just a little over a year after the DeFeo murders. George and Kathy Lutz pull into the driveway of 112 Ocean Avenue with a moving truck full of furniture, boxes, and dreams for a fresh start. George was 28 years old. Kathy was 30. Together, they had 3 young children. Like any young family, they wanted a bigger home, more space, and a better future. The problem? They couldn't normally afford a house like this. But because of what had happened there just 1 year earlier, the price had dropped dramatically. It was almost too good to pass up. The real estate agent made sure they knew everything. Nothing was hidden. She explained exactly what had happened inside the house. 6 people had been murdered there. The previous owner's son was sitting in prison. This wasn't some neighborhood rumor. It was a fact. George and Kathy looked at each other, thought about it, and decided to move in anyway. They believed the past was the past. After all, a house is just wood, bricks, and walls, right? At least, that's what they thought. Before they officially settled in, Kathy asked for something simple. She wanted a priest to bless the house. Not because she believed it was haunted, just because, after a tragedy like that, it felt like the right thing to do. A local Catholic priest agreed to come, as he walked from room to room, quietly blessing each part of the house. Everything seemed perfectly normal, until he reached one upstairs bedroom. The moment he stepped inside, according to his later account, he suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The room felt freezing cold. His hands started trembling. Then, he claimed he heard a voice, not loud, not screaming, just a calm, clear, almost whispered command. Get out. He immediately stopped what he was doing. Some reports say he felt something strike his face. Others say he simply became so uncomfortable that he left the room without finishing the blessing. Years later, skeptics questioned this story, while believers pointed to it as the very first warning that something inside the house didn't want anyone there. Either way, the Lutz family had no idea what the priest had supposedly experienced. They happily continued unpacking. The first couple of days, everything felt completely normal. Boxes everywhere, furniture still wrapped in plastic, kids running around the house, trying to decide which room belonged to who. George spent most of his time fixing little things around the property. The house even had a beautiful boathouse beside the canal. It seemed almost perfect. Sure, the murders crossed their minds every now and then, but they tried not to think about them. People move on. Life moves on. That's what they believed. Then, small things started happening. Nothing dramatic. Nothing you could immediately call paranormal. Just odd. George began feeling cold, really cold. Even when the heating system was working perfectly, he couldn't seem to warm up, no matter how many sweaters he wore. No matter how high he turned up the heat, he still felt frozen. At first, he blamed winter. After all, December in New York isn't exactly warm. But something didn't feel right, because nobody else in the family seemed nearly as cold as he did. A few days later, George noticed something else. Every single night, without fail, he woke up at exactly 3:15 a.m. The first time, he ignored it. The second time, it felt strange. By the 5th or 6th, it stopped feeling like coincidence. Eventually, he realized it was happening almost every night. Always the same time, always 3:15. Years later, people connected that time to the approximate time investigators believed the DeFeo murders had taken place. Was it really connected? Nobody knows, but George became obsessed with that clock. Every night, 3:15, again and again. Not long after, the children started talking about someone new, or rather, something new, a friend, at least. That's what they called it. One of the girls said she had met someone named Jody. At first, George and Kathy weren't concerned. Lots of children have imaginary friends. Psychologists even say it's completely normal. But then, the descriptions became stranger. Jody wasn't another little kid. She wasn't invisible. According to the children, Jody could change shape. Sometimes she looked like a little girl. Other times, she appeared as a massive pig standing outside the window. A pig with glowing red eyes, watching the house, watching them, waiting. George laughed it off. Kathy tried not to think about it. Kids imagine weird things all the time, didn't they? As Christmas approached, the atmosphere inside the house slowly changed. George became unusually short-tempered. Little things made him angry. He barely smiled anymore. He spent hours sitting silently, staring out the windows toward the water. Sometimes, he'd chop firewood for hours, far more than the family actually needed. Almost obsessively, friends who visited later said George didn't seem like himself. It was as if his entire personality had shifted. Kathy noticed it too. The warm, relaxed man she had married was disappearing. Something felt different, and she couldn't explain why. Then came the smell. It happened without warning. One moment, everything smelled normal. The next, the entire house filled with an odor that Kathy described as something dead, rotting meat, decay, like an animal had died somewhere inside the walls. George searched everywhere, the basement, the attic, behind furniture, nothing. The smell disappeared as suddenly as it arrived. Then, a few days later, it came back again, always without explanation. The family also reported strange cold spots. Not just chilly rooms, specific areas. You could walk down a hallway, take one more step, and suddenly it felt like you had entered a freezer. Take another step, the warmth returned. Invisible pockets of freezing air, moving around the house. No broken windows, no drafts, no obvious reason. Then, things became harder to ignore. Doors that everyone remembered closing were suddenly open. Cabinets stood wide open in the kitchen. Chairs appeared slightly moved. George blamed the kids. The kids blamed each other. Nobody admitted touching anything. At night, the house began making sounds. Heavy footsteps, slow creaking, banging noises upstairs. George grabbed a flashlight more than once, walked through every room, checked every window, every door. Nothing. The house was empty. At least, that's what it looked like. By the end of the second week, nobody in the family was sleeping well anymore. George kept waking at 3:15 a.m. The children became increasingly afraid to sleep alone. Kathy constantly felt exhausted, even after a full night's sleep. It was almost like the house itself was draining them. And deep down, even though nobody wanted to say it out loud, they had all started asking themselves the same question. What if this house wasn't as empty as it looked? Because what happened over the next 2 weeks would turn a strange story into one of the most famous paranormal cases in the world. By the third week, the Lutz family had stopped trying to convince themselves that everything was normal. At first, they blamed stress. Then they blamed the weather. Then they blamed the old house. But eventually, they ran out of explanations. Whatever was happening, it felt real to them. And according to George and Kathy, it was getting worse every single day. George changed more than anyone. Friends later said he barely looked like the same person. He stopped laughing, stopped joking, stopped acting like himself. Instead, he became distant, cold, almost obsessed with certain parts of the house. Especially a small room on the first floor that he nicknamed the Red Room. It wasn't even a normal room. It was a tiny hidden storage space behind the basement. The previous owners had painted it red. The children loved it. They thought it was fun, but George couldn't stop thinking about it. Sometimes he'd just stand there, looking at it, for no reason at all. Later, paranormal investigators would claim the Red Room might have been connected to whatever presence they believed was inside the house. Skeptics, of course, dismissed that idea completely. Meanwhile, Kathy's condition was getting worse. She later claimed she constantly felt exhausted, not the kind of tired you get after a long day, the kind that makes your whole body feel heavy, like all your energy had simply disappeared. Sometimes she'd wake up feeling like she hadn't slept at all. She also began noticing strange shadows, not clear figures, just dark shapes, moving out of the corner of her eye. Every time she turned to look, they were gone. Was it fear, lack of sleep, or something else? Nobody could say for sure. The children became terrified. They no longer wanted to sleep in their own bedrooms. They kept talking about Jody, but this time, it wasn't playful anymore. According to the girls, Jody wasn't just visiting. Jody was always there, watching, waiting, sometimes outside the window, sometimes inside the house. George tried to reassure them, but deep down, even he was beginning to lose confidence. Then came one of the most disturbing nights. Once again, George suddenly woke up. He looked at the clock, 3:15 a.m. Exactly, again. But this time, He claimed something felt different. Instead of simply waking up, he said it felt like something had physically forced him out of bed, as if invisible hands had pulled him awake. He walked downstairs. The house was completely silent, too silent. Then, according to George, he heard voices, not whispers anymore, actual voices, clear enough to understand, telling him, "Get out." He searched every room. Nobody, nothing, just silence. Around the same time, Kathy reported hearing screams echoing through the house. She rushed through every room expecting to find one of the children hurt. Nothing. Everyone was asleep. The screaming stopped as suddenly as it had started. Later, she would describe the experience as one of the most terrifying moments of her life. The family reached their breaking point. They no longer cared about proving anything. They no longer cared whether people would believe them. They just wanted to survive. On January 14th, 1976, only 28 days after moving in, George and Kathy gathered their children, grabbed whatever they could carry, and left, fast. They didn't carefully pack. They didn't organize anything. According to their story, they abandoned furniture, clothes, personal belongings, even valuable possessions. None of it mattered anymore. The only thing they wanted was to get as far away from 112 Ocean Avenue as possible. And unlike so many people who say they're leaving a haunted place, they never moved back in, not even for one more night. Once their story became public, it spread across America like wildfire. Newspapers covered it. Television stations wanted interviews. Radio shows couldn't stop talking about it. Some people believed every word. Others laughed at the entire story. The debate had officially begun, and it has never really ended. Now, let's hear from the people who were closest to the case. The next few clips are real interviews with those who claimed to witness these events. Let's see what they had to say.
Mr. DeFeo went up to Montreal, Canada. He went to a shrine where many miracles had occurred. A lot of people don't know this. He went to that shrine and he brought back from there a priest, an exorcist, who said masses in the house. Why? If this was a hoax that was created by the Lutz family, why 6 months before this man was murdered and his family was an exorcist in that house? While the priest was saying a mass and performed the exorcism rituals, candles were blowing out, doors were opening and closing. There were footsteps all around the house. Ronald DeFeo, who was the murderer of his family, fled the house. He didn't stay there. He did not want to stay there while the priest was in that house. What caused him to leave? Obsession? Possession? Who can say? We do know that this young man did murder every member of his family in that house, shot them to death.
Quote, January 2nd. Holding his nose, George forced open the paneling and shone his flashlight around the red-painted walls. The stench of human excrement was heavy in the confined space. It formed a choking fog.
My name is Patty Camarado. I was friends with Allison DeFeo, the girl who was murdered with the rest of her family here in 1974. This I'm going to show you is the mysterious red room that's so noted for in the book. This door, which they say was never here, was here, is here, always will be here, I suppose. This is the red room. Nothing more than a storage area where Allison and her brothers and I used to keep toys. Just red, you know? There's never any feeling of spirit presence or ghosts or any sort of thing like that. It's just a play area. Used to keep toys. Nothing more than that.
Why did it happen to me? I don't really know. I do not have the answers for that. Like places like Amityville. That if you gave me $1 billion, I wouldn't go in your house again. Because it messed up my life and my husband's life. Terrible. Horrible place. Oh, it was terrible. That's where I levitated with my body in that home. And the things that happened there were terrible. Really, really terrible.
Just a few months later, in March 1976, the house attracted the attention of two people who were already becoming well known in paranormal investigations, Ed and Lorraine Warren. By that point, the Warrens had investigated dozens of reported hauntings. Some believed they were America's leading paranormal investigators. Others believed they were simply very good storytellers. Either way, the Amityville house immediately caught their attention. They organized a full investigation, along with reporters, television crews, psychics, and professional photographers. One of those photographers was Gene Campbell. He brought special infrared cameras designed to capture images in complete darkness. His job was simple: photograph every room, every hallway, every staircase. Take hundreds of pictures. Maybe something unusual would appear. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The house was mostly empty, quiet. Still, the investigators walked from room to room, taking photographs. Hours later, when Gene Campbell developed the film, one picture immediately stood out. In the doorway upstairs, there appeared to be a young boy looking directly at the camera. His eyes seemed almost glowing white. The figure wore dark clothing, half hidden behind the doorway. Watching, the photograph quickly became one of the most famous paranormal images ever taken. People soon nicknamed it the Ghost Boy. Believers immediately connected the figure to John Matthew DeFeo, one of the young boys murdered in the house in 1974. They argued that his spirit had somehow remained inside the home. Others believed the glowing eyes were caused by the infrared camera reflecting light. Skeptics offered a completely different explanation. Some claimed the ghost was actually another investigator standing in the hallway. Others argued it was simply a trick of perspective and lighting. Even today, nobody has ever been able to prove exactly what that photograph captured. And that's exactly why it remains so famous. One photograph, two completely different explanations, no definitive answer. The Warrens themselves later described the atmosphere inside the house as overwhelmingly negative. Lorraine Warren claimed she sensed what she described as an evil presence. Ed Warren believed the house had experienced something far darker than an ordinary haunting. According to them, the energy inside the house felt oppressive, hostile, almost as though something wanted people to leave. Critics strongly disagreed. They argued there was no scientific evidence supporting those claims, but the Warrens never changed their position. For the rest of their lives, they continued to say that Amityville was one of the most disturbing investigations they had ever conducted, and thanks to their involvement, the legend of Amityville became even bigger. No longer just a local murder story, it had become an international paranormal mystery. But the strangest part of the story was still yet to come, because once Hollywood got involved, the line between fact and fiction would become almost impossible to separate. After the Lutz family shared their story, everything changed. What started as a local news story in a small town on Long Island quickly became a national obsession. People couldn't stop talking about it. Was this really the most haunted house in America? Or had the world just fallen for an incredible story? Either way, everyone wanted to know more. In 1977, author Jay Anson released a book called The Amityville Horror. The book was based largely on interviews with George and Kathy Lutz, who described everything they claimed happened during their 28 days inside the house. Nobody expected what happened next. The book became a massive bestseller. Millions of copies were sold around the world. Almost overnight, Amityville went from being a true crime case to becoming one of the biggest horror stories ever told. People who had never even heard of Long Island now knew the address, 112 Ocean Avenue. Then Hollywood came calling. In 1979, The Amityville Horror was turned into a movie. The film was a huge success. Audiences loved it. Even people who didn't believe in ghosts found themselves fascinated by the story. Over the following decades, there were sequels, remakes, spin-offs, and dozens of movies inspired by Amityville. Some were based loosely on the original story. Others were almost entirely fictional. Today, there are so many Amityville movies that it's hard to keep count. But here's something important. Many of those films were made simply because the word Amityville had become famous. That doesn't mean they're connected to the original case. In fact, most of them aren't. As the story grew, so did the controversy. Investigative journalists, police officers, writers, and paranormal researchers all started asking difficult questions. Some details in the Lutz family story seemed inconsistent. Certain timelines didn't perfectly match. Some witnesses remembered events differently. Then another claim appeared Some critics suggested that George and Kathy may have exaggerated parts of the story after realizing how much public attention it was receiving. Others even claimed the haunting story had been developed with help from legal advisors connected to Ronald DeFeo Jr.'s defense team, hoping to create doubt around the original murders. Supporters of the Lutz family strongly rejected those accusations. They insisted the family had nothing to gain from living through such a terrifying experience, and George Lutz himself continued defending his story for decades. Until the day he died, he repeatedly said the events were real. He admitted that movies and books added dramatic details, but he insisted the core experience actually happened. So today, you're left with two completely different versions of the same story. One version says, a family moved into a house that had witnessed unimaginable violence. Something evil was already there. It slowly affected everyone inside, and after just 28 days, they escaped with their lives. The other version says the murders were tragically real. Everything after that was a mixture of fear, misunderstanding, exaggeration, media attention, one of the greatest marketing successes in horror history. The truth? No one has ever proven either side beyond doubt. Then there's the house itself. Contrary to what many people believe, it was never abandoned forever. It was never sealed off by the government, and it certainly wasn't demolished. It's still standing today. Over the years, the house has changed. Some renovations were made. The famous quarter-moon windows were redesigned, and eventually, the address was changed from 112 Ocean Avenue to 108 Ocean Avenue. Many people believe this was done to discourage curious tourists from constantly showing up outside. Whether that was the main reason or not, the crowds never completely stopped. Even today, visitors still travel to Amityville hoping to catch a glimpse of the house. Some take pictures from across the street. Others simply stand there, wondering. The families who own the house after the Lutzes have generally reported living normal lives. Several owners have publicly stated that they never experienced anything paranormal. No mysterious voices, no glowing eyes, no invisible forces, just an old house with an incredibly famous reputation. Of course, not everyone believes them. Some paranormal enthusiasts argue that later owners simply wanted privacy and didn't want thousands of tourists surrounding their home every day. Again, there is no way to know for certain, and that's really what makes the Amityville story so different from most horror stories. It's not just about ghosts. It's not just about demons. It's about uncertainty. Every piece of evidence seems to have two explanations. The DeFeo murders were real. That much is undeniable. But everything that came afterward depends entirely on who you choose to believe. Do you believe George and Kathy Lutz? Do you trust Ed and Lorraine Warren? Or do you believe the skeptics who say fear, media, and money turned a tragic crime into a worldwide legend? There isn't a single answer that satisfies everyone, and maybe there never will be. Even after more than 50 years, people are still debating what really happened inside that house. Researchers still investigate it. Paranormal fans still visit it. Skeptics still challenge it. And filmmakers still make movies about it. Very few stories survive that long. Even fewer remain this mysterious. So, was Amityville truly haunted, or was it simply the world's greatest ghost story? Maybe the real horror isn't what happened inside the house. Maybe the real horror is that we'll probably never know the full truth, because the house is still there. The murders are still part of history. The photograph of the so-called ghost boy still divides opinions, and the arguments never stopped. Maybe they never will. If walls could talk, the walls of Amityville would probably tell the scariest story of all. Or maybe they'd stay completely silent, and somehow that might be even more terrifying. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories aren't the ones with clear answers. They're the ones that leave you wondering long after they're over.